Maran stirred her tea vigorously with a spoon, though the sugar had long since dissolved. She just needed to do something to keep her hands busy. It always helped when she was nervous. Right now, she was extremely nervous, but how could she become Richard's ex-wife? Sitting at the table across from her not long ago, she was choosing this table with so much love. She wanted to make the family home cozy. Until now, her husband's return from business trips had always been like a small holiday for Mary. She always put on a beautiful dress, cooked his favorite food, and glowed with excitement because she missed her beloved very much. But this time, he didn't call her in advance like he usually did. No, this time he just rang the doorbell. But when she opened the door, she was completely confused. For the first few seconds, because there was a woman about her age standing behind Richard, and there was a boy of about 10 years old standing next to her, holding her hand. "I'll explain," Richard said, the most tired, stupid, and inappropriate phrase for such a situation. Marian nodded and stepped back, allowing the strangers and her husband into the apartment. She didn't understand what was going on. At the time, she thought maybe they were his relatives. Well, they were, in a certain way. Richard and Maran had been married for 6 years, but had met the year before. They met in a bookstore. Everything happened just like in the movies. It was a very romantic encounter, a sign of destiny. Maran was trying to get a love novel by her favorite author and could not reach the top shelf. The sales assistants were busy, and it was pointless to wait for their help. But suddenly, she heard a pleasant male voice. "Miss, let me help you, otherwise, you'll fall down together with this shelf." Maran turned and saw a man in a funny hat. "Thank you so much," she said and smiled at him. Maran clutched the book. She had been waiting for it for a long time. "Do you really read books like this?" The stranger pointed to the book, apparently understanding everything by the pink hearts on the cover. "Yes, why do you ask?" Maran asked in surprise. "Just wondering," he shrugged. "I mean, such books are full of lies. Real life is more interesting. The men from the novels couldn't exist in reality, you know." "Actually, my book preferences are none of your business," Maran replied without a smile. She couldn't stand strangers prying into her private life. So, she headed for the cash register. Why did he even bother her with his inappropriate comments? Actually, she was satisfied with the fact that in her life, everything was quiet and not as exciting as on the pages of such novels. That's what books are for, to take a break from reality, in which sometimes everything is so predictable and boring. "Miss, I'm sorry," he approached Maran when the cashier was already handing her a bag with the purchase. "I didn't mean to offend you, I just wanted to keep the conversation going somehow." "I forgive you," Maran said in a mocking tone, adjusting her scarf. "But you failed. Failed in what?" "Failed to impress you," Richard said and smiled a silly, apologizing smile. "Oh no, you impressed me. I would never have let you into the book club." "Are you a member of a book club?" "My friends and I, actually." "Excuse me, but I'm in a hurry. Let me walk you home." She shrugged her shoulders and silently moved toward the exit. He hurriedly opened the door in front of her. She walked out without thanking him and headed towards the bus stop. "Can you give me one more chance?" "Why?" "Because I like you so much." She glanced at him. He's so persistent. What was that supposed to mean? That he's dangerous, and she should run to the first bus and get as far away from him as possible? Or no, that's nonsense. He's just a man who's not very romantic or creative, but that doesn't automatically make him a bad person. She doesn't know him at all, so maybe she should give him a chance. And so, she accepted his invitation to have a cup of coffee right now and gave him her phone number. And then, events developed not too quickly but dynamically. They were learning about each other's lives. He grew up in a single-parent family, but he had always dreamed of a large, friendly family. Richard worked as a manager in the advertising department of a large provider of mobile and internet communications. He had a higher education. Maran liked to listen to his stories more than to talk about herself. But in the case of Richard, everything happened differently. She had to accept the fact that he happened to be an extremely quiet man. He preferred to be silent almost all the time. That day in the bookstore, he had literally forced himself to talk to the stranger. That's how much he liked her. They didn't talk about books ever again because, as it turned out, he didn't like to read. The only reason he went to the bookstore that day was that his boss had told all the employees to read a book by some sales expert. Meetings with parents on both sides took place one after the other. First, they went to his mom and grandmother, who, unfortunately, was not that old but wasn't thinking straight and understanding what was going on around her anymore. "You seem very nice to me," Richard's mom said to Maran. "I think you'll understand him, forgive him, and always support him," she added and looked strangely. But Maran ignored it. She decided that Richard's mom was too excited to meet her son's fiancée. As for Marian's parents, they had a very mixed reaction to her choice. "It's impossible to understand if you've met the right person," Mom said. "Years of living together will show everything, but remember that you can always count on our help." "I think you should not be in any hurry to get married," her father said. "Take your time, first try to live together and get to know each other better. Weddings are expensive and stressful. What's the point of it all if you're going to be divorced in 3 months?" "Dad, stop it," Maran said indignantly. "What?" He raised his eyebrows. "Your mom was right to say that time will put everything in its place. I remember the story of my great-grandfather's wedding. The wedding was amazing, great treats, beautiful decorations, and expensive drinks because they were in love. Because they couldn't wait to legitimize their relationship. And how do you think it ended? 3 days after the wedding, a strange drunk man showed up. There were still guests there, and the festivities continued. That man climbed up on the table and announced that she was his fiancée and that she was expecting his baby. Everyone rushed to the bride with questions. She lowered her eyes and cried, saying that it was true. That she made a terrible mistake. She wanted to secretly marry my great-grandfather and make him the father of her child. How? How did it end? The groom and the father of the baby shook hands and left to talk. An hour later, they came back and said there would be no wedding, and he would never even talk to the bride again. Anyway, she left with that man. He seemed to be an alcoholic, but as they say, you cannot escape your destiny. Marian was not familiar with this page of family history and was very impressed. However, she decided that her situation was completely different, but she would certainly be careful. If she noticed signs that Richard was cheating on her or anything else, she would not be forgiving and understanding wife. She would immediately make a scandal. So, Maran and Richard got married. And then, instead of wasting money on a wedding trip, they decided to invest in buying an apartment with a mortgage. They managed to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood with many playgrounds nearby. Maran was very happy and proud of herself. They didn't wait long to have a baby, and soon their daughter was born. It was happiness for the whole family. "She is so beautiful," Richard's mom said when she first saw her granddaughter. "My son can only have beautiful children. I've always known that." And her mother-in-law looked at Maran in a strange way again. But Maran was completely immersed in her motherhood. She even began to read less because now every minute of her life was filled with real life. And life went on, year after year. And then, Richard returned from a business trip, and Maran let those strangers in. Richard immediately announced who these people were. Maran felt as if the earth vanished beneath her feet, and she was falling into some abyss. It turned out that he had brought his ex-wife and their son home because they had nowhere to live. "No," was the first thing Maran could say when she heard her husband. "No," and she took a step back, looking at her husband and the guests with horror. The woman desperately wanted it all to be nothing but a bad dream. "Wait, let me explain the situation," Richard said in a guilty voice. "No," she repeated and tried to stop her hysterical laugh. "Excuse me, please," the woman said. "Excuse me, please. Can my son sit down somewhere? He's got a fever, he's sick, a cold." Maran opened her mouth in surprise. In fact, a moment ago, she was going to kick them out of the apartment. "Let's go into the living room," she said. "Here, let him lie down on the couch. Do you need antipyretics?" "Thank you, I have medicine." The woman reached into her bag. "I'll get some water," Maran said, hesitated, and added cautiously, "or would juice be better? There's also a vitamin berry drink." "What would be better?" "Thank you very much, a vitamin drink if possible." "Okay, wait a minute," Maran nodded and stopped. "Thanking me every minute," she added sharply. "I haven't done you any good yet." Richard was waiting for her in the kitchen. "I should have told you everything earlier, but it's just a mistake of my youth, you know." He lowered his eyes, and Maran grimaced. Now, her husband reminded her of some kind of a clown who tried to please the audience with his awkward behavior. "Yes, you know, that would be nice to know that my husband, the father of my child, already has another family." "We're not a family. We tried, it didn't work." "It actually worked. You even succeeded in having a baby together, a byproduct of cohabitation." Maran said the last words and immediately gave herself a mental slap for being rude to the innocent child. "So why didn't you tell me before? I thought if you found out, you'd leave me." "But I didn't leave them to their fate, I helped financially. Not official child support." Yay, not official. "I persuaded Helen not to file for child support, and I transferred them some money from time to time." "How much?" "How much?" "What? How much did you pay her monthly?" "As much as I could." Richard was obviously confused. But then he said the amount. "It didn't send the money every month. Moreover, we had a wedding, and then a baby was born. Yes, I transferred money to my ex-wife sometimes, but only when I could. But I always spent most of the money on the needs of our family and our daughter." Maran silently poured the drink, took it to the child, and returned. She had been cooking dinner before her husband returned, and now she suddenly realized that she had to turn off the oven. Maran replayed Richard's answer once again in her head, and she remembered how many beautiful gestures he had made: gifts, flowers. "You say you helped them, but that money isn't even enough to feed a dog," Maran observed. Richard looked completely confused and offended, but Maran didn't feel sorry for him. "Why do you even care how much money I gave my son?" he frowned. "I thought you'd be glad I didn't waste our money on strangers." "Strangers? How can I be glad?" Maran grumbled. "Do you think it's all about money?" "No, my dear, it's about trust. You've been lying to me all these years." "Wait," she stopped, raised a finger, and closed her eyes. "What about your mother?" "She knows," Richard sighed. "She and I have talked it over and decided not to tell the truth. But she loves you, and she loves her granddaughter and her grandson." "Grandson? What does she love him?" "Of course, but less than who?" "Than her granddaughter?" "What makes you think that?" Maran literally bit her tongue because her thoughts were confused, and she wanted to accuse her husband of all sense. But she stopped herself because right now she really needed answers to all her questions. "Okay, can I ask you a favor?" "Yes, anything. Please keep quiet during this evening." "Okay," she said with a sweet smile, patted him on the shoulder, and walked into the living room. Helen put the boy on the couch after taking off her son's outer clothing and quietly read him a book. When Maran entered, she closed the book and stood up. Maran looked at the unexpected guest one more time, but she wasn't actually a guest. It's unclear who she was. Helen looked about 6 or 8 years older than Maran. She was pretty, but clearly not the type of woman who followed fashion and visited beauty salons. Her clothes were neat but very poor. However, her son's clothes were quite different. It seemed to Maran that this woman's child was clearly her priority. "Helen, you must be tired after the long trip," Maran smiled nervously. "Dinner is almost ready. Why don't we have a meal? No conversations, during dinner. But then we'll talk, and you'll tell me everything, okay? Without Richard. He can go outside or go to his mother's or go to the balcony, but I want to hear all the details from you, not from him." Helen looked frightened, but then she seemed to realize that the owner of the apartment didn't bite, and she nodded shyly and agreed. There was some fuss. Helen needed to feed her son. His name was Vincent, and he, like all sick children, was very moody. But then they finally sat down at the table and had dinner. Her Maran had to secretly step on Richard's foot under the table twice because he tried to talk about something. But then his wife asked him to leave the kitchen, and he left without arguing with Maran. "Don't hurt them, please," he asked his wife before he left. "Can you please go away already, or I'll hurt you?" Maran said indignantly. Helen was sitting in the kitchen, the medicine worked, and Vincent was finally getting better. It was time to talk and find out the truth. Maran made some more to pew a box of cookies on the table and put 5 teaspoons of sugar in her. It seems that scientists have proven that sugar can improve your mood. That would be very helpful right now. "What did you want to know?" asked Helen timidly. "How long have you known Richard?" Helen began to tell her story. "How long have you known Richard?" Helen began to tell her story. No, she had known him only a little before they moved in together. They had met when Richard had come to her village to help sell his grandmother's house. They decided it would be better for Grandma to move to the city and live together with him and his mother. Helen was also from that village. She grew up and lived there. She often helped Richard's grandmother because they were neighbors. That's how they met. "You know how persistent he can be," Helen said, immersed in her memories. "Kind of funny, but sometimes too pushy." "Oh, sorry," she immediately felt embarrassed. "No, that's okay," Maran nodded. "You're right about that." What happened next? Richard, who had already quit one job and had not yet taken another, decided to stay in the village. He didn't want to sell the house for almost nothing, so he started to renovate it. He moved into Helen's house. Her parents died a few years ago from cancer, and she felt so painfully lonely. Richard could be charming. He knew how to distract her from sad farts, she said. They said they would go to the city and start a new life together. And then, Helen told him she was pregnant. "I was a fool," she confessed and wiped away her tears. "I thought that if we had a baby, he'd realize that everything between us was serious, that we were a family." Helen was already 7 months pregnant when Richard finally sold his grandmother's house and moved back to the city. He simply packed up one day, left the village, and called her only when he was already in the city, explaining that everything was complicated, that he wasn't ready for fatherhood, but he wouldn't give up the baby. He just needed time to think about everything, and he did. When Vincent was born, he announced that Helen was not the girl of his dreams. And then, moving away from the sentimental part, he added that if Helen would file for official child support, it would offend him as a man. But if she wouldn't, then he would help them as much as he could and visit his son from time to time. And Helen agreed. "He didn't tell me anything about you," Helen said. "He said he had a personal life, but it was none of my business. And then there was a fire in our house. Of course, it can be rebuilt, but it takes time and a lot of money. But now we have nowhere to live." "What about the neighbors?" Maran squinted. "Couldn't they shelter you?" It's not that simple with neighbors. Helen averted her eyes. I had a romance with a man, but anyway, he said he was divorcing his wife because she couldn't have children. He said Vincent was like his own son to him. He made promises, and then his wife got pregnant, and he came back to her. Then he told everyone in the village that I had bewitched him. Bewitched him? Seriously, Maran laughed. Who even believes in such nonsense? Some people do, Helen shrugged. It's a small, distant village. People in the villages have a different vision of life. Besides, I am a single mother. In the villagers' opinion, it's a disgrace. I know you may not believe me, but Richard told me that he was married, that he had a daughter. But he told me about it when we were already on the train. I assume this is your own apartment? Yes, Maran nodded. Yes, my husband and I pay the mortgage jointly. Or rather, usually, I pay out of my paycheck. I am very embarrassed that we came to you. I'll try to find some other place to live. You know, I'll call my colleagues right now. Helen's eyes sparkled with a new idea. Since it so happens that Richard let us down, I'm not blaming him, but anyway, I need to make some calls. Maybe some of my coworkers can shelter us for a while. Maran felt terrible. She had a headache. However, if she could replace all those problems with a severe headache for the next couple of years, she would have said yes without hesitation. Maran also thought that she was lucky because her mom had picked up her daughter from daycare today and would stay at her grandparents' until tomorrow. She didn't want to involve her daughter in any of this, at least not today. When they finished their conversation, Richard knocked on the door. He'd been walking around the neighborhood the whole time. So what's decided? He asked cheerfully. What did I tell you? Maran looked at him angrily. When were you leaving? I don't. I told you to shut up. Anyway, I have to go to work tomorrow, so I'm going to prepare a room for Helen and Vincent and then go to bed. And don't even try to talk to me today if you expect me to forgive you. If you think that you can fix anything with your words, she poked him in the chest with her finger. Don't even dream about it. Got it? Richard sighed heavily. Have you told your parents already? No, and it's none of your business when and how I am going to tell them about it, Maran replied. In the morning, while making breakfast for 4, Maran fought a lot. Technically, Richard had not cheated on her, it had happened before they met. But he had done a terrible thing, and, most importantly, he pretended to be a victim of circumstances. Maran could only imagine what would happen when her parents found out. Actually, maybe they wouldn't insist on divorce because it was her choice. But she had already made her choice. She left work early and stopped by the bank on the way home, dialing Helen's number at the same time. Hi, Maran smiled at her husband when he got home. You're just in time, dinner's almost ready. Hi, he smiled back cautiously. Daddy. And looked out of the room. How are you doing? He said, taking off his jacket. Wonderful. What do you mean? Well, I guess you're asking about your ex-wife and your unwanted son. Are they've already moved into their new apartment, Maran said, smiling. I see, Richard nodded, sitting down at the table. Helen really liked the view from the window. There's a big park and a pond with ducks in it. What do you mean, what view, what pond? Richard's eyes rounded, his confusion was reasonable. From the window of their small mortgage apartment, there was a view of the courtyard and a small section of the road. There wasn't any pond or park nearby. Oh, I forgot to clarify, Maran started to serve dinner. They've rented an apartment for 6 months, so far, in a new residential complex. Everything is clean and neat, and there's a medical center and a kindergarten nearby. Helen's a smart woman, and she's already found a job. Wait, what are you talking about? Oh, you want details, Maran's eyes sparkled. Okay, listen to the details. It turned out that she had withdrawn all the money that they had been saving to buy a car. This car was supposed to be a gift for Richard. Maran deposited almost all of her money in that account. She made the decision to withdraw the money and give it to Helen. I think she deserves some compensation. After all, you haven't paid child support for all those years, and anyway, women should support and help each other. Besides, she's the mother of your son, so don't be greedy, honey. Eat your dinner before it gets cold. Marian sat down at the table and began to eat her dinner as well. She had no doubt that she had done the right thing. Even her parents, especially her father, supported her in her decision. And for her husband, Maran knew that Richard had no choice. He would have to accept the situation. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.